Here we go. We're on. We're doing it. Okay. So, Yochanan Part 8. Yay! We're moving right along. We're about the middle of Chapter 4. We won't finish Chapter 4 today, but we're going to start the conversation with the Samaritan woman, and we're gonna see the importance in this particular little piece of conversation of knowing the Torah and understanding the prophets, because a lot of this, if we don't understand it, we're not going to understand what's going on with Yahushua's encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well. So, Yochanan Part 6. Let's talk to our Elohim and then we'll take a look. Master Yahuwah, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us. We thank you for it in the name of Yahushua. Amen. All right. So just to kind of recap what we talked about last week, we said that we came up with this idea. Once we begin to learn to examine our walk on a regular basis, we transform from simply being grateful to praising Yahuwah our Elohim. Then through making teshuvah, we come to a point of commitment and trust in and towards our Elohim. We become watchful and protective of this relationship by seeking to observe our steps and retain our relationship in a proper balance. We become fruitful in our spiritual being, which transcends into our physical life. When we are troubled by a situation or several issues that arise in life, we have a tendency to disregard our relationship with Yahuwah and look into ourselves for solutions. We allow the deliverance and the restoration that we receive from Yahuwah our Elohim to become tired. In other words, we fail to recognize that Yahuwah is present and that we must seek his point of view when confronted with life issues. We lose clarity. Our carnal nature clouds our spiritual nature. We perceive the darkness and dwell there. We must allow our carnal mind to die so that our spiritual mind can go to the Father and receive rest and guidance from his Spirit. Now this was, again, we talked about Yahushua was leaving Jerusalem and entering back into Galilee. There's a lot of stuff going on. He was tired, and we see this, that from the story of his arriving to the well, we understand that we go through things when we go to the well, but again, it's the difference in being able to perceive that the well is full of water or whether it's a pit that we're getting stuck into. And this is the difference between be'er, a be'er, that means well, but can also mean a pit, and its root ba'ar, that means to have clarity. So we have to stop and sit down and be willing to drink from the water before we can just fire off whatever solutions come to our mind. So this study will consider the first part of the conversation with the Samaritan woman. We will be considering our spiritual condition, and we will take another look at our belief systems. We will again consider the importance of understanding Scripture from a deeper spiritual perspective, as opposed to a more literal interpretation. So, I think that was me beeping, so I'm... Oh, okay, well, there we go. I'm just going to... that's all right, you know. The balls and chains here. We got to turn the balls and chains off. Okay, there we go. All right. So we're going to read the first... we're going to read verses 7 through 9 from Yochanan, or the Gospel of John, chapter 4. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Yahushua said to her, "Give me a drink," for his talmidim had gone into the city to buy food. Then said the woman of Samaria to him, "How is it that you, being a Yehudi, ask for a drink from me who is a woman of Samaria? For the Yehudim have no dealings with the Samaritans." So, in our last look at Yochanan, we consider that Yahushua was basically on the run. He was fleeing from Herod. We considered that he came to this well tired from his journey from Jerusalem. So before we look into this encounter at the well, let's consider other encounters that have occurred at wells throughout the history of the Torah. First of all, we have Eleazar, the servant of Abraham, was sent to Abraham's kinfolk to find a wife for Yitzhak. And then we read about Moses. Having fled Pharaoh, he fights off some aggressive shepherds, and in the process ends up meeting his future wife Zipporah at the well. So what we can consider from these two events is that a wife was either being sought or a wife was being discovered at the well. Yahusha now comes to the well and encounters a Samaritan woman who had come to the well to draw water, just as Rebekah had come to draw water when she met Eleazar. Now Eleazar had asked Elohim to show him Yitzhak's future bride, Isaac's future bride, as the one who offered him and the camels a drink when he asked. The difference here is that Yahusha receives excuses why a drink cannot be offered to him. Now the Samaritan woman is not the bride, but she could be if she had a better understanding of the word of Yahuwah. We've learned from our past studies that the Samaritans were the remnant of the house of Israel that had settled into the southern part of the northern kingdom after the exile to Babylon. We talked about it. The Babylonians came, they took the most educated people, they took the most skilled people, and they left the rabble behind. And whatever they didn't kill off, it kind of regrouped and made its way to the southern part of the kingdom to be close to the house of Yehuda, where they would have some semblance of protection, so they hoped. Now, we've also learned that their worship was not in agreement with the Torah, and as such, they were despised by the Yehudim of the southern kingdom of Yehuda. And this is reflected in verse 9 that says, Then said the woman of Samaria to him, How is it that you, being a Yehudi, ask for a drink from me, who is a woman of Samaria? For the Yehudim have no dealings with Samaritans. So, what we can consider from this encounter, at least superficially, is that Yahuwah is sending his servant to find a bride amongst the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the distant kinfolk of Yehuda. That his Talmudim were not with him illustrates to us that Yahuwah, our Elohim, is looking to find us directly. He's not going through a dating service, and he's not going through something. But what it tells us is that we have to develop a personal relationship with our Elohim. And the Talmudim were not present. And that we all encounter his Yahusha when we come to the well that is his Torah. Now we, like the Samaritan woman, have intermixed dogma that we must discover. And yes, we all do. We're all working through it because, almost 2,000 years of dogma and doctrine and tradition from the churches and the rabbis and everything have left us kind of, okay, now we have to figure out what is and what isn't. So we all have intermixed dogma that we still hold on to. It's just learning about it and making the choice whether this can actually stand in my relationship with Elohim, or is it something that I need to get rid of because it contradicts my relationship with Elohim. So, yet, it is the master that asks us for a drink. So we must be willing to offer up our dogma and traditions before Elohim, before he will show us whether they are right or wrong. We must be willing to expose our spiritual side to Yahuwah and then accept any guidance or correction that the Ruach shows. The choice to make corrections in our lives is our responsibility. If we learn that we are not in agreement with the word of Yahuwah. Now the bride is being sought. She must be the right bride, and she must be the one that is willing to offer the right water. Okay? And this story really, really plays into what happened at the well with Eleazar and Rebekah and finding the right bride for Yitzhak, the son of Abraham, that means exalted father. It is a type. The story was a type of what's happening here. So Yahusha answered and said unto her, if you knew the gift of Elohim, and who it was that says to you, give me to drink, you had have asked him, and he would have given you living water. So the gift of Elohim is his word. In his word we discover not only how to truly love Yahuwah and one another, but we also discover what and who Yahusha is, as a concept of Yahuwah's deliverance and restoration, and as the Word made flesh who would bring this deliverance and restoration into the physical realm of humankind. Yahusha is the gift of Yahuwah Elohim. If we know what the gift is, we will recognize who the servant is that has the 10 camels loaded with the gifts, who is asking for a drink. Nothing in our man-made doctrines or traditions can replace the truth found in the word of Yahuwah. We can only recognize this truth by knowing what his word says, because we do not know, we do not ask, or we do not know what to ask. Because we don't know what the word says, we don't know what to ask. If we would take time even just to read it, not necessarily to study, but sometimes you read things and the scripture pops into your head when you're reading something else, and you say, I wonder if these two are connected. So, but we don't know because we don't ask. We ask for things based on our understanding of our doctrines and traditions, but we fail to ask according to the truth of the word of Yahuwah. So let's review a point from our last study. Once we begin to learn to examine our walk on a regular basis, we transform from simply being grateful to and praising Yahuwah Elohim. Through making teshuvah, we come to a point of commitment and trust towards our Elohim. We become watchful and protective of this relationship by seeking to observe our steps and retain our relationship in its proper balance. We seek to treasure our relationship, and we become saturated by the life, the living water that Yahuwah brings us. So, how do we know Yahuwah and his servant? By seeking the truth in his word and aligning ourselves to it. In this we receive the living water that is the Ruach of Yahuwah. Now, we're going to look at verses 11 through, is it 14 or 15? I want to say it's, 15. So, the woman said unto him, Sir, you have nothing to draw water with. The well is deep. From where then do you have this living water? Are you greater than our father Yaakov, who gave us this well and drank from it himself and his children and his cattle? Yahusha answered and said unto her, Whoever drinks of this water shall thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. And the woman said unto him, Sir, give me this water that I thirst not, nor come here to draw. So, Yahusha is talking about a spiritual indwelling that will link her to a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim within the garden for eternity. This can start right away. The living water that he has to offer is the Word. But the only thing that she can see is that he doesn't have a bucket. How's he going to get the water out of the well? And how's he going to... So, two different conflicting points of view. Our lack of understanding in a large part is our insistence on a completely literal interpretation of the Word of Yahuwah. We become distracted by the historical facts and the plethora of dogma that comes from them. We get stuck in the parash of the Scriptures, which is the topical storylines, but we fail to discover the remes or the drash, the deeper significance, the spiritual meaning that draws us closer to our Elohim. We want to read the Bible and study the Bible in our own language, and as a result, we fail to perceive the living water within the word of Yahuwah. We get so caught up in trying to perceive the well, the be'er, that we fail to see clearly what's inside of the well, which is ba'ar. We fail to receive clarity. Verse 13 tells us that we will never find a quenching of our spiritual thirst if we insist on only drinking the water of literalism. She said, you don't have anything to draw the water up from, or draw the water up with. So, where were we? Okay, quenching of the spiritual thirst. Okay. Having a deeper understanding of the word brings us into the realm of Yahuwah. It opens our eyes to the garden. We have become so indoctrinated to what we have always believed that when the truth in the word contradicts it, we struggle. Verse 15 shows us that there are some who will either not understand this, or they will reject the very idea of a spiritual interpretation. Now we're going to consider the next 3 verses from a completely different perspective than what is normally taught. When I went to the seminary, they said, we teach this from a literal interpretation of the Bible. What it says in English is exactly what it means. Then as a result, you're getting a very, very superficial topical idea, and they're building doctrines based on these topical ideas. Another problem that we face is that when we build doctrines based on a Greco-Roman mindset, as opposed to understanding things the way the Hebrews understand it, the Jewish culture is very different than the Roman culture. In counseling, when I talk to I'll say white folks, hope I don't get in trouble for this, I talk to them a different way. But if I deal with a Hispanic family, the hierarchy within that family is different. I know, I came from a Hispanic family. My uncle ruled the roost. So you have to counsel from a different perspective. The same thing with African American families. It's from a totally different perspective. So whose perspective do we need to look at the Torah from? Ours, which can be any number of different social norms? Or are we looking at it from Yahuwah's point of view, from a Hebraic standpoint that it was meant? They were agrarian. They were, rain meant life to them. So we look at it from their point of view. The Roman, everything is deified. Everything is solid. Anyway, that's enough of that. So, having a deeper understanding of the word brings us into the spiritual realm of Yahuwah. We've been indoctrinated to what we've always believed. So we're going to take a look at these 4 verses, and then we're going to take a look at them in a slightly different way. Verse 16 says, Yahusha said to her, go call your husband and come here. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Yahusha said to her, you have well said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and he whom you now have is not your husband. And that you said truthfully. And the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Now, just from that, to look at this just topically, if we understood the challenges that they faced within the Torah, the challenges that the book of Joshua gave them, the challenges within the book of Judges, and then if we understood why the prophets came and why they did what they did to try to get people back on track, we actually see a historical timeline in this. You've had 5 husbands. You rejected those 5 husbands. The husband you don't have is not your husband. And she says, I perceive you're a prophet. Okay? Everybody with me? Okay. So let's take a look. The word of Yahuwah, if we will take the time to study it, shows us who the real or the true husband is. Here Yahusha is asking the Samaritan woman to call her husband. Her answer is, I have no husband, to which Yahusha responds, you have said well, I have no husband. So our topical interpretations make this woman to be out some kind of a prostitute or a woman who is having or has had a number of affairs. If the Samaritan woman represents someone who is worshiping in a manner that is not in agreement with the word of Yahuwah, then we have to look a little deeper than the surface of what this is telling us. Some deeper interpretations say that the 5 husbands that she has had represents the 5 kingdoms that have ruled over the house of Israel, and the one that she's residing with now is a representation of the Roman influence that would continue on, and we're still in that Roman influence if you want to look at it from this point of view. But there is a deeper meaning that completes the Hebraic line of thought, the Hebraic history that we have throughout the Torah, is that the 5 husbands that she has had represent the 5 books of the Torah. They are no longer relevant in her eyes. The husband that she is now residing with is her false dogma and tradition that is not in agreement with the word of Yahuwah. It is about this husband that Yahusha says, he whom you now have is not your husband. This takes us back to the idea that the husband is supposed to be Yahuwah, based on a covenant relationship with his ketubah, that is the Torah. But she has rejected that covenant relationship, and now she is with a husband that is not her husband. The issue is, since we have rejected the first 5 books, how will we know who the real husband is? What happened when Yisrael as a whole rejected the word of Yahuwah? He sent them the prophets to correct them and to guide them back. They were oftentimes ignored and even put to death. So verse 19 is a wordplay on the rejection of the Torah and the coming of the prophets. Verse 20, our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you say that in Yerushalayim is the place where men should go to worship. Our dogmas and traditions have been with us most of our lives. For many of us, they were the dogmas and the traditions of our family throughout generations. The Samaritans were convinced that Mount Gerizim was where they were to worship, and that the manner in which they were worshiping was right because it's the way that they'd always worshipped. They rejected the temple and the Torah's instruction regarding worship, which is much the same way that the Torah has been rejected today, having been replaced with dogma and tradition that is not in agreement with it. And the next verse is going to give us more detail. We're going to cut off from going into verse 22 when he begins to talk with her about the Father is seeking those who will worship in spirit and in truth, because what we're reading here is basically a very topical look at a deeper implication, and we'll get the deeper implication, and it'll all come together when we talk the last few verses of this chapter. So, verse 21 says, Yahusha said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. So, here's the stickler. Neither Christianity nor Judaism is what the Father is seeking. The time is approaching, then there will be a realization of this, and the time that worship will once again be in agreement with the manner in which the Father is seeking, in agreement with his instructions. And this is to be able to worship in spirit and in truth, to be able to find the narrow road that isn't necessarily the doctrines of Christianity, isn't necessarily the doctrines of Judaism. They both, like we've said in the past, they both have very good points. They both have very important assets for us to be able to hold on to. But we're looking at the narrow road. What does the Torah say? And do we need to change things that we've drawn from both of these superhighways into our lives? And when we look at You worship what you don't understand. We worship what we understand because deliverance is of the Yehudim. That's going to take us back into the Torah. It's going to take us back into Kings, Chronicles, so that we can understand why deliverance can come from the Yehudim. He's here with a Samaritan woman who needs to be delivered. Why didn't he go to a Jewish woman? He's supposed to go to the Jew first and then to a Gentile, but here he's talking with a Samaritan woman because he needs to bring her back into the fold so that she can find her husband and be reunited with the rest of the family, who is the basically three brothers that are left behind in the southern kingdom. So we're going to stop here at Yochanan. So we've been asking ourselves, and we have to continue to ask, what parts of my system of belief are not in agreement with the word of Yahuwah? The question to follow up with is, what am I prepared to do about it? And then, what kind of drink are you prepared to offer? And it's going to get very, very clear with the next study. And with that, we can say grooviness is achieved and